Hi book lovers, welcome back to my channel. I'm going to be doing my wrap up for September. I read about 20 books, 20 romances last month, so let's just get started. Here are all the books that I read back in September. The first book is actually book one of a duet. I haven't finished it yet, but I will eventually because I ended up loving this one. This is Pieces of a Life by Julie Ann. I gave this one 4.5 stars. I loved it. This is book one in the Colton and Josie duet. It's a second chance romance and it was pretty much what I wanted in a second chance romance, but also it has a weird twist to it too. It's a former childhood friends to lovers to enemies to lovers romance. So Colton and Josie have had a roller coaster of a relationship. They grew up together, they were neighbors when Colton moved in across the street from Josie. They became best friends, pretty much inseparable, but their childhood love, that teenage love, was very, very angsty, a little toxic, but I still love them. They were so adorable together as kids, and most of the chapters that are set in the past where you get to learn about them falling in love for the first time, those are the ones in Colton's point of view, and then Josie's point of view is the ones that are set in the present day, set 17 years after Colton broke Josie's heart so that she could follow her dreams, follow her career. And to this day, Josie is very, very angry at Colton and has not forgiven him. She hasn't even seen him in like over a decade, but now he's back. He is a homicide detective, he's a single dad, and he does work closely together with Josie now, much to her reluctance because she works as a forensic pathologist. So she works with dead bodies, doing autopsies, and he's, you know, the detective trying to figure out who killed that body. So Colton is back in her life now, but she does not make it easy for him to win back her heart, which I love seeing. I hate when heroines just like instantly take back the hero after he hurts her. And I mean, yes, it's been a long time, but I do love seeing a hero work for the heroine. So there's some groveling here. Colton is very, very persistent when it comes to Josie because he knows that she is the one for him. She is it for him. His daughter is adorable too, but my favorite part about this book was Josie, honestly. She's a very interesting heroine. She's very strong, independent. She knows that she never wants kids, which I don't see all that often in heroines in romance books, so it's kind of nice to see something different. And then towards the end of the book is where we get this weird, slightly paranormal twist. Like, I don't even know how to describe it. So that's why I do definitely need to read the second book in the series, the second book in this duet, to get all my answers, because it was just really weird at the end. I read a Jennifer L. Armentrout book next, and this series, it's part of a series that's probably one of her more underrated ones. It's Moonlight Seduction, which is book 2 in the De Vincent series. It's a trilogy. I read book 1 and 3 years ago, but I never, you know, went back to read book 2 until now because my library got the audiobook for it. So I was like, okay, let me just finish up the series. Sadly though, this one was only okay. I didn't like it quite as much as the other 2 books in the series. I give it 3 stars. It's a bit of an age gap romance. Nikki and Gabe have this 10-year age gap, I believe. She grew up with them, with the De Vincent brothers, in their creepy haunted house because her parents worked there. Nikki has always had a crush, this huge crush on Gabe, which finally led to something that happened one night, but then he ended up breaking her heart and she left. Now she's back though because her parents need help, and as soon as she sees Gabe, she still feels that crush for him. She does at least try to hide this and not just moon over him, which was great because Gabe was just so hot and cold with Nikki. It got a little annoying on his part. I just couldn't really stand Gabe because of how he would keep pushing her away. He would keep hurting her because he felt like he wasn't good enough for her. He was too old for her. That part got tiring to read really fast, but I did really like the friendship that they develop when they, you know, when they reunite. There is some fun banter when Gabe isn't pushing Nikki away. There's a little possessiveness and jealousy on his part, but he's the type of hero who just digs his head in the sand and refuses to acknowledge why he's feeling that way. And then like the rest of the series, the book is also romantic suspense, so there's this whole mystery involved with this stalker in Gabe's house. Nikki keeps seeing someone in the house and it's causing her so much paranoia and anxiety. So there's that whole suspenseful part with them trying to figure out who that is. But yeah, this one was okay. It's been a long time though since the last time I read a JLA contemporary romance. She's definitely more well known for her fantasies, her paranormals, but I have read and loved a lot of her contemporaries in the past, but this one was just, you know, not one of her best. I read a mafia romance next. I read Mafia Mistress by Mila Finelli. It's book 1 in the Canes of Italy series. It's got an age gap, a forbidden, slightly taboo romance, and it really should have worked for me, but I just didn't love it. I gave this one 3 stars. It's a romance between the heroine and her fiance's dad, and both of them are part of this mafia world. Francesca is the daughter of this mafia made man, and of course, being a daughter, being a woman, she is basically a pawn, and she's forced to marry someone she has never met and who she doesn't love. Fausto is her fiance's dad, and he's the one who's pushing for this marriage of convenience. He's a mafia lord. I think he's somewhat higher on the mafia food chain. So he forces Francesca to move into his house to live with him and his son. Francesca absolutely hates this, but she does form a friendship with her fiance, and somehow ends up falling for Fausto for his dad. I don't really understand how or why. I just didn't understand the romance here or how it developed. And then the book does end on a cliffhanger, but honestly, I'm just not invested enough to continue with the series. I mean, I think it's only one more book, but still, I just didn't really care enough to continue with Fausto and Francesca. I want to say though, part of the reason why I didn't enjoy this one as much as I wanted to was because of the audiobook. I listened to the audiobook and I do not recommend it because the narrator for Fausto, he has an Italian accent because Fausto is Italian, but it just did not sound good, especially all the dirty talk and stuff. It was so cringy to listen to. So if you want to read this one, just read the ebook or the paperback. The audio was not great. My next read was The Savage and the Swan by Ella Fields. I've been really curious about this one because it's the author's, I think it was the author's first fantasy romance or one of the first ones from her. She normally writes contemporary, but she's kind of started writing some fantasy romances, so I've been wanting to try this one out. It was good, I liked it, but I didn't love it. I gave it 3.5 stars. A great thing about it is that it's a standalone fantasy romance, so not a long series, just one book, and the blurb says it has elements of Hades and Persephone, Rumpelstiltskin, and the Swan Princess. So it's almost got a fairy tale feel to it, and I loved the idea of it a little bit more than how it actually played out, because a lot of things just didn't really make sense or weren't fleshed out enough or just had big plot holes. But anyway, this is like a forbidden romance. The heroine Opal, she is a swan shifter, which I thought was really interesting. She is also the princess of her kingdom, and her kingdom is in this war with another kingdom that's being ruled by a savage king. There's a lot of revenge going on in this book. Like the savage king's parents were killed by the heroine's parents, so he wants revenge against them. Opal, on the other hand, really wants to save her kingdom, create peace with everyone, but she's kind of helpless throughout the book. She grew up very sheltered because she's like the last of her line, and the only independence that she has is running away to this little hideaway where she meets a man that she starts to fall for, but he's a soldier from the enemy kingdom. The thing is, she has no idea who he is, but it's a little bit obvious to the reader that he is not exactly who he says he is. I don't want to say too much about the rest of the book just because there is a lot going on and I don't want to spoil anything, but I did like the hero. I did like Dade. He was just so much more interesting than the heroine. I did really want to love it though. It's got an enemies to lovers romance, these two enemy kingdoms. We have shape-shifting fae, but all this just wasn't fleshed out enough. So I honestly loved the idea of the story more than the actual story. For my next book, I read The Rivalry by Nikki Sloane. I love Nikki Sloane. I read so many of her books, but The Rivalry is probably her most normal one. It's a classic noodle college sports romance. The main characters are from two schools that have rival football teams. It's Ohio State and I believe University of Michigan. I don't really know. I don't follow football. But Kayla is a cheerleader for one of the schools and Jay is on the football team for the other school. When they first meet though, they meet at a mutual friend's wedding. They have no idea who the other person is, but they feel this like instant connection with each other. Something almost happens that one night, but then Jay had to leave to take care of his sick friend. Eventually though, Kayla does find out that Jay plays for her rival school, and it was so funny how disgusted she was when she found that out. She's like, I can't believe that I almost hooked up from someone from that school. But she still likes him, she still feels that chemistry with him, and Jay is pretty much all in at this point. He really wants to be with Kayla, and he just does everything he can to woo her, to make her forget the schools that they go to, and he just does his best to make her fall in love with him. It was just surprisingly a very fun and sweet romance, definitely a very different vibe to Nikki Sloane's other books, but still very enjoyable. So I gave this one 4 stars. Next up, I read Northern Stars by Brittainy Cherry. This is the 4th and final book in her Compass series, and this might be my favorite one. I gave this one 4 stars. It's a former friends to lovers romance, so it's a second chance romance, and the hero went off to be this big Hollywood star. The first half of this book is set in the past with Aiden and Haley growing up, being best friends, and Haley struggling a lot with her weight and being bullied over it. I actually love this first half a lot more than the second half. Like, I love these past chapters because of how sweet and just wonderful Aiden and Haley were together. Like, Aiden is an absolute sweetheart. He just cherishes and adores Haley and doesn't give a crap about her weight. I also really loved Haley's parents too, especially her dad. Like, her parents were so supportive and so wonderful to her. Even though there's so much heartache and turmoil because of what Haley is going through, I love that she had such a wonderful support system. But of course, since this is a second chance romance, we know that Hayden and Haley eventually have to break up. And this is because Aiden has dreams of being this famous actor, and they're from this tiny small town, so he has to move across the country all the way to LA, to Hollywood, to make it big there. The second half of this book is the second chance romance part. Aiden and Haley are all grown up, but Aiden is very, very angry. He's a little dramatic in this part, but I mean, he's an actor, so we'll go with it. But his character kind of did this 180 that I didn't really vibe with, which is mostly the reason why I didn't enjoy the present day romance as much as the past. Still, I did really love these characters. I loved Haley's journey with learning to love herself, so that's why I had to give this one 4 stars. It's like 5 stars for the first half and then 3.5 for the second half. I also finished up another series. I've been finishing a lot of series recently, and this one is Fallen Empire by K.A. Tucker. Fallen Empire is the 4th and final book in the Empire Nightclub series, which is her new adult mafia romance series. I've been liking the series, but I don't love it as much as the Wolf Hotel series, and this final book was probably my least favorite of the Empire Nightclub series just because of how unnecessary it felt. It kind of felt like the story was just dragged out, and it probably could have ended at 3 books. I mean, yes, Gabriel and Mercy finally get their happily ever after. They finally get that conclusion to Gabriel's awful father, but besides that, nothing much happened, and everything that was important that happened definitely could have been put in the previous book. So for a final book, I only gave this one 3 stars. It was not my favorite, though I would love a spin-off of the series. I would love more mafia romances from K.A. Tucker. Like, Caleb, Gabriel's brother, has a lot of potential, so I would love a book for him. I would love a series for him, but also if K.A. Tucker, you know, wrote more mafia romances, more dark romances, that would be great too. I read a couple historical romances last month as well. This first one is Aphrodite and the Duke by J.J. McAvoy. I was really excited about this one because I have read J.J. McAvoy before. I've read like her noodle romances, her contemporaries, and her mafia romance, and this was her very first historical romance, and I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. It was very much reminiscent of the Bridgerton show. Not the Bridgerton books, but the Bridgerton show, with how like diverse the cast was. There's also a queen who's very, very involved in these characters' lives. So this historical has a second chance romance between Aphrodite and Evander. These two were in love, they were about to get married, but then he married someone else and just broke Aphrodite's heart. Fast forward to a couple years later, Evander is a widower now, and he wants Aphrodite back in his life. There was a reason for him to break her heart. I can't say that I really love that reason, but I was like, okay, fine. They reunite when Aphrodite comes back to London to help with her sister's debut, and she is getting a lot of proposals from men, but there's never really anyone else for Aphrodite but Evander, and she doesn't really try to move on from him either. I kind of wish she did and didn't just run off to the countryside to lick her wounds, but they're back now. They're still still very much in love even after Evander broke her heart, and it doesn't really take that long for them to get back together. And another thing that I wasn't a huge fan of was just the multiple different point of views besides just Evander and Aphrodite's. Still, the writing was good though. It definitely felt like a historical romance, and I would read more historical romances from J.J. McAvoy. It is pretty low in angst and drama, so it's a pretty easy read too. I just had a little bit higher expectations for it because of how much I enjoyed the author's books in the past. For my other historical romance, I read To Catch a Raven by Beverly Jenkins. This is her latest romance, her latest historical, and I enjoyed it so much. I give it 4 stars. It's a freaking fake marriage romance from Beverly Jenkins, so of course I would enjoy it. The heroine Raven is known as a grifter, so she's pretty much a thief. She comes from a long line of grifters who steal to support their community, but then the government shows up and they threaten her and her family with prison unless she helps them. So now Raven is forced to partner up with the government to help recover the Declaration of Independence, which has just been stolen by a former Confederate official. Her partner in this mission is Braxton, our hero, who is supposed to play the role of her fake husband. And these two do not start off on a good note because Braxton is very judgmental of Raven and how she's a grifter. And then because he doesn't like her, she doesn't like him back. So it's very, very fiery between them. The chemistry is crazy, but they're forced to pretend to be in love, to pretend to adore each other for this mission. So I love the whole fake marriage here. It was so much fun to read, and that tension between them is just burning throughout the book. I also love the idea of Raven being a grifter. Like, she is basically like a Robin Hood type of character. So this is a great read. It's book 3, the 3rd standalone in the Woman Who Dare series, and Raven is she definitely fits the bill of the series title. For my next book, I read a debut romance. This is Bend Toward the Sun by Jen Devon. I gave this one 3 stars. It was okay. I didn't love it. I honestly was more bored throughout the book than anything. And it's also the type of read that straddles the line between romance and women's fiction, which isn't my favorite thing, but some authors can make it work. This one just didn't work for me that much. So it's a romance that's set on a vineyard. Rowan, the heroine, has a PhD in botany. She was burned by her cheating fiance, and she's never really experienced love, not even from her mother. And Harry is the doctor hero who is struggling a lot after losing this 4-year relationship and also recently losing a patient. And these two meet at Harry's parents' vineyard, which Rowan has just been hired to help restore. The romance here almost felt like a slow burn just because these two have a lot to deal with internally before getting together, and I just sadly never grew invested in this romance. I like the vineyard part. That part was fun and interesting, but the romance and the characters were just okay. Next up, I read 2 books, well, 1 book and a novella from one of my favorites, from Kennedy Ryan. I read Hookshot and the novella Hoops Holidays. Hookshot is book 3 in the Hoop series. I've read book 2, still haven't read book 1, so I'll eventually go back and finish up the series, but Hookshot was fantastic. Another great read from Kennedy Ryan. I give this one 4 stars just because I didn't love it quite as much as Blockshot. This is Lotus and Keenan's book, and I actually really wanted to read this one, read the romance, because I read The Close-Up last month, and that novella was set at Keenan's 40th birthday party on a yacht, and I do remember Keenan and Lotus from Blockshot, so I've been really curious about these two for a long time, and I finally got to read about them. Keenan is a professional basketball player. He is very well known, very well respected, and he is divorced. His wife cheated on him, and now all he wants to do is just protect his daughter from everything that's going on. Lotus is 10 years younger than him, and she's a fashion designer, and these two have been in and out of each other's lives for years, and there's always been some good chemistry between them, but they've never acted on it until now. These two are going to be working closely together because Keenan has accepted this sort of modeling partnership with Lotus's boss, and normally Keenan would never do something like this, but he just really wants Lotus. And these two were on fire together. I always love Kennedy Ryan's steam, but this one was fantastic here. I thought it was great how these two just tried so hard to keep this like as a fling only with no complications, but these two just can't help but fall in love because of how meant to be they are together. There is quite a bit of drama though when it comes to Keenan and his ex. Like, this woman does not make it easy for Keenan and Lotus. I love the fashion world setting. I love seeing all the previous characters in the series. All the secondary characters are so great as well. It did feel a little long though, just because there was so much going on here, but I still loved it. It's another solid read from Kennedy Ryan. And then as soon as I finished up Hookshot, I had to immediately pick up Hoops Holidays because the couple here was mentioned briefly in Hookshot. The hero here is friends with Keenan, and they talked a little bit about his relationship. Okay, so technically the title for Decker and Avery's romance is called Full Court Press. This bind-up is just that novella plus a couple bonus stories from the Hoops couples. It's a romance between another basketball player and a sports journalist. Decker and Avery first met in the locker room 10 years ago when Avery was gonna interview him. He hits on her though, and she's like, absolutely not. I'm here to interview you. And even though there was some good chemistry between them from that first moment that they met, they don't actually get together until 10 years later. Decker is now a single dad, and he has been chosen to be the guest host on Avery's sports show. And Decker is very determined to get Avery to finally say yes to going out with him because even 10 years later, he knows that there's something between them. Kennedy Ryan always does such a great job with her novellas. I love them. This was another great one. I give it 4 stars. It's hot, it's steamy, and it's also so emotional and romantic. Even though there's so many things, so many different factors that are pushing Decker and Avery apart, they do everything they can to be together, and that was so great to read. So if you love sports romances, if you love basketball romances, definitely read the Hoop series. For my next book, I read Sweet on the Greek by Talia Hibbert. This is book 3 in the Just for Him series. They're all standalones, they're all quick, hot reads, and this one was so good. It's sports romance, it's fake dating. The hero, Nick, is this millionaire Greek professional soccer player, and as soon as he meets Arya, the heroine, he is just gone for her. He instantly falls for her, but unfortunately for him, she has sworn off dating. She is pretty much the one woman he wants that he can't have, so he comes up with a little scheme. He asks her to be his fake girlfriend to keep all these women from hating on him and just bothering him. At first she's like no, but then he makes her an offer that she can't really refuse, so they fake date now. I gave this one 4 stars. I had so much fun reading it. Like, anytime you read a Talia Hibbert book, you know you're in for a good time. These two are silly and fun and adorable. I love them. So if you're in the mood for something that's a rom-com with some good fake dating, definitely pick this one up. I read a couple Corinne Michaels books next. I read 3 of them back to back. This first one is Come Back For Me, which is book 1 in her Arrowwood series. It's a small-town romance with a single mom who is in this abusive relationship that she's trying to escape. The main characters actually had a one-night stand 8 years ago when Ellie, the heroine, was trying to just forget the situation she was in. They never got each other's names, they never got each other's contact information, so they don't see each other for 8 years until Connor goes back to his small town. He's the youngest of the Arrowwood brothers, and these brothers have been forced to go back to their small town. Connor finally reunites with Ellie though, the one woman that he's never been able to forget, when he comes across her daughter. Her daughter has been hiding away because of Ellie's abusive husband, her abusive father, and Connor sees her around his farm, so he takes the daughter back to Ellie, and this is when these two reunite and he realizes that she is in this abusive marriage. It gets very emotional because of the situation. Like, Connor does everything he can to protect Ellie and her daughter. Ellie's doing everything she can to protect her daughter and herself. It's just a very tragic situation, but Ellie and Connor find this beautiful love between them. So I thought this romance was great, super emotional, some good small town feels, and I'm definitely invested in all the Arrowwood brothers as well. So I gave this one 4 stars. My next Corinne Michaels read I also gave 4 stars. This one is Help Me Remember, which is her amnesia romance. This one is part of another small town romance series from Corinne Michaels. It's the Rose Canyon series. It's the first book, and it's a brother's best friend romance. It's also got some romantic suspense because the heroine, she was in this accident that caused her to lose her memory of like the past few years. Brielle was with her brother, her beloved brother, when he got shot and died, and now she's trying to recover these memories in order to figure out who killed him. Spencer is her brother's best friend who she's always had a crush on, and she has no idea that they've actually been together for a little while, and they just never told anybody about their secret relationship. And Spencer right now doesn't want to tell Brielle the truth just because he doesn't want to mess around with her brain injury and her trying to recover her memories. But the romance here was so good. I loved the angst. I loved how Spencer was just so torn between wanting to be with the love of his life and trying to protect her and trying to like help her with her memories. And I felt so bad for Brielle too, just because she's lost so many of her memories. She's completely forgotten about her being with Spencer, and she can't remember who her brother's killer was. She's just so lost in trying to figure out everything that's going on, and Spencer's just with her along the way. I thought this was a great book. It was a great start to a new series. I loved all the secondary characters, especially Brielle's brother's widow. I also read the second book in the Rose Canyon series. I sadly didn't love it quite as much as the first one. I gave this one 3 stars. It's mostly because of what happened towards the end of the book, which I wasn't a huge fan of. So this one is actually a marriage of convenience romance. The main characters are married. They were in the military together and they decided to get married for some good benefits. And the reason why these two have been separated since they first got married was because Emmett fell in love with Blakely, but Blakely just couldn't risk being in love because every person who she has loved in her life has died. Now she's back though in his life. She shows up in his small town because she is a private investigator, and her latest case with this missing girl has led her to the small town. Emmett doesn't really believe her though. He doesn't believe that his small town where almost nothing happens would have someone involved in like human trafficking. So Blakely has a week to prove to Emmett that someone in this small town has something to do with her case, and if she can't, then she has to leave and also sign some divorce papers. So I love the premise of this one. I love the idea of these two soldier friends getting married for this marriage of convenience, and I actually really was enjoying the first half of this book, but then something happens in the second half that kind of came out of nowhere, and I just didn't like how it played out because I mean, you know that it's going to end in a happily ever after, so it kind of felt really dragged out with what happened. I don't want to say exactly what. I did feel for Blakely though, even though it was a little frustrating with her constantly pushing Emmett away, but you understand her reasons for it when, you know, all of her loved ones have literally died. So I did really like these characters. I liked Emmett and Blakely, but I just wasn't happy with how things played out. For my next book in this wrap up, I read Devil of Dublin by B.B. Easton. This one was great. I give it 4 stars. It's a slightly dark mafia romance. It doesn't get too heavy with the mafia stuff. Like there's some involvement. This one is a sort of second chance romance between Darby and Kellen, who met as children in Ireland. Kellen is Irish and Darby has Irish roots. Her mother was born in Ireland, and she finally gets to go to Ireland with her mother and meet her grandfather, meet the rest of her family when she's really young. Darby and Kellen first meet when Darby goes off to the forest to play fairies. She's young and she has this wild imagination, so when she comes across Kellen, she believes that he is a fairy. It's so cute and adorable and wonderful, but at the same time, you know that Kellen has been abused. He's in this terrible situation as an orphan who's been taken in by this awful priest. This priest has made everyone in their town believe that Kellen is like the devil or the son of a devil. So everyone has turned their back on Kellen except for Darby. Every year when Darby goes back to Ireland for a little while, she goes and meets with Kellen. She's like the sun for him. She's like the only source of light that he has, the only reason why he's able to keep living. It's so emotional and so beautiful. I loved reading about them as kids growing up and them falling in love until unfortunately Darby's mother passes away and she has no way to go back to Ireland and see Kellen again. It's years later now in the present, and Darby and Kellen have both been through some traumatic things, but as soon as these two reunite, it's like all that love between them as kids is still so strong even as adults. And then it gets so good because Kellen literally kills for Darby. It's like touch her and you die, literally. So I love this one. It's a great read. It's very much got a Fated Mates feel to it, even though it's not really paranormal. It's got a slight paranormal aspect to it, but not really. The whole Fated Mates part was so sweet and romantic. So this was such a good read. This was B.B. Easton's first dark romance, like first mafia romance, and I did interview her about this one and I was like, please write some more of this. So hopefully, you know, we get more from Baby Easton. I also read the new Sally Thorne last month. I read Angelica Frankenstein Makes Her Match. This is a historical romance, historical paranormal romance, obviously a Frankenstein sort of retelling. Angelica is Victor Frankenstein's younger sister, and she helps him with creating revived dead humans. Angelica wants love really, really badly, so she ends up creating her perfect man. She gets different body parts from different men. She gets the best body parts. She especially gets like the biggest dick, and she ends up creating the hero, who she names Will. Will gets revived, and he is so disoriented because he's made up of all these different body parts that are not his, and I felt so bad for Will with the kind of trauma that he's going through, having, you know, hands from someone else. His dick isn't even his. Like, he legitimately feels like some sort of monster, and he is not happy that he's alive. And then they try to figure out who exactly Will is and how he came to die. There was another being that Victor created at the same time that Angelica made Will, and that creature ended up stealing Will's ring that had some sort of identity that would have said who exactly Will is. So they're trying to track down that other monster. They're trying to find that ring. The weird thing about this book is that I'm not exactly sure how I feel about it. Like, I liked it, but I also didn't. I mean, I love the whole idea of this Frankenstein retelling, but about Frankenstein's sister, but Angelica was kind of an awful person with how she created Will and just forced him to live. Also, she could have love and have a man in her life. But I did love Will. I loved how sweet he was, how protective he was over Angelica. There was a little possessiveness on his part, and I did like that there was some steam here, more than the typical Sally Thorne book, I would say. And he was never really hateful towards her, even though he had every reason to be. So I'm torn over this one. It's like a 3.5 star read. It wasn't bad, but some things just did rub me the wrong way. And then my second to last read was Promises We Meant to Keep by Monica Murphy. This one I gave 3 stars to. It was okay. It was my first time reading one of her Lancaster books. Like, she has, it's not really a series, but she has a bunch of standalones about the Lancaster family and their cousins and stuff. And I feel like if I had read those books before this one, I probably would have liked this one a little bit better. But this is a brother's best friend romance. The heroine, Sylvie, she comes from a very wealthy and powerful family. Spencer is her brother's best friend. They fell for each other when they were really young, and they sort of developed this toxic relationship, and it was toxic because of Sylvie. Like, everything was always on her terms. They would see each other only when she felt like it. It definitely felt like she used Spencer, even though she did genuinely love him, but she just wasn't in the right headspace to actually be him and love him, because Sylvie's mother is quite the character. She literally tried to kill Sylvie when she was younger. Sylvie was always sick when she was growing up, and it was literally because her mother was poisoning her in some sort of way. So Sylvie has a lot of trauma, and that unfortunately ruined her relationship with Spencer, because literally days after she and Spencer have sex for the first time, she marries someone else. She marries this old man because her mother forced her to. She's very weak when it comes to her mother, and she's always done what she's told. But now it's a couple years later, Sylvia's finally pushed her mother out of her life, and she and Spencer reunite at her brother's wedding, and Spencer hates her. He's pretty cruel and just not happy to see Sylvie at all because she broke his heart. But the thing is, they kind of fall back together pretty quickly after this. I expected a little bit more push and pull, but that didn't really happen. The whole mother situation was so tragic, but also really interesting, because I don't think I've ever read something like this, at least not in a romance. Sylvie is a very tough character just because she comes across as someone just not likable, but at the same time you do feel for her because she's been through some crazy stuff, and she was just so much more interesting to me than Spencer was, which is why I just never really fell in love with this character. This book wasn't amazing for me or anything, but I did appreciate how different and unique it was. Okay, so while I was editing this video, I somehow completely forgot to include these last 2 books in my wrap-up, and one of them I even did a whole reading vlog for, so I don't know how I forgot that book. So I read It Ends with Violence by Elle Thorpe. This is the third book in her St. View Psycho series, the third and final book in the series, which is reverse harem and romantic suspense. Sadly though, this was my least favorite of the series, and honestly my least favorite from Elle Thorpe so far. I gave this one 3 stars. It was pretty disappointing and underwhelming for me. Like, I found myself very bored throughout the book. It just felt so long and dragged out. Like, I wanted a good solid conclusion for the series and for these characters, but I felt like they were going around and around with the plot. And then my favorite character, Vincent, it felt like he just didn't get as much love as the rest of the harem. It felt like he was left behind and everyone else just preferred Scythe over Vincent, which is so sad because he's such a sweetheart. He's my favorite character of the series and he just deserved so much more. So this one, as a final book for the series, it just wasn't great. And then for my actual second to last book in this wrap up, I read When Gracie Met the Grump by Mariana Zapata. This is the one that I did a reading vlog for and somehow forgot that I read it last month. This is the newest MZ book. It's a superhero romance with a superhero hero who gets injured and then he crash lands onto the heroine's front yard. And he is a huge grump, like straight up a jackass for a lot of the book. Gracie is your typical sweet and quirky Mariana Zapata heroine. She takes in the hero, also known as the Defender, that's his superhero name. She takes him in, takes care of him, helps him heal, even though he's very ungrateful. We get to learn about the superheroes in this world, where they came from, and there's a little bit of world building with this, but it's not all that fleshed out. I personally didn't mind it because I still enjoyed the book. I give it 4 stars. It's of course another slow burn because it's Mariana Zapata and she doesn't really write anything else but that. And the amazing thing is that she was able to make me fall in love with this hero and make me believe in the romance. The development of the romance was really well done here. The main characters reluctantly become friends and then they become roommates and then something more. Again, I do have a reading vlog for this book if you want to hear more in-depth thoughts from me. I go into a lot more detail in that vlog, and plus I do add some spoilers at the end. Anyway, back to the official final book in my wrap-up. And then my final read from September was The American Roommate Experiment by Elena Armas. I finally finished this book after starting it like the beginning of the month. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It wasn't quite as good as the Spanish Love Deception, but I did really enjoy it. The nice thing about this one is that we get both point of views. It's a dual point of view book. The Spanish Love Deception was just in the heroine's point of view, but we do get both Lucas and Rosie's point of view in The American Roommate Experiment. Lucas and Rosie have a very different vibe to them, even though it is still fake dating here. It's just such a sweet romance, especially since Lucas is that golden retriever kind of hero. He is a total sunshiny type of guy. It's not grumpy sunshine though, because Rosie is not a grump, but Lucas is just he's a very happy kind of guy, even though he's been through some more tragic things. So the book starts off with Rosie having to move out of her apartment because her roof has literally collapsed. So she goes over to her best friend Lena's apartment to stay because Lena and Aaron are off on their honeymoon, and there's some random guy who's trying to break in, except he's not so random because he's actually Lena's cousin, Lucas. And Lucas is the same guy that Rosie has kind of followed along online on his social media and developed this crush on him. So she's super awkward during their first meeting and it's hilarious. Eventually though, these two do become roommates because both of them need a place to stay and Lena's apartment is literally it for them. And they come up with this whole fake dating thing because Rosie is a romance author, but she's experiencing some writer's block and she needs inspiration. So these two go out on fake dates, try to romance each other so that Rosie has something to write about, but of course they do end up falling for each other and developing feelings for real. They were just so sweet and feel good together. Like, they were adorable to read about. I had a lot of fun reading this one. I love seeing Lena and Aaron again. And even though I didn't love this one quite as much as the Spanish Love Deception, it was still a good follow-up book, a good second book for Elena Armas. And that's it for this wrap up for September. Those were all 20 romances that I read last month. As always, if you read any of these books, let me know your thoughts. Links to everything will be down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching and I will see you all next time. Bye!